Welcome to the Customer Smarts podcast, where you'll discover smarter ways to deliver customer experiences. I'm your host, Justin Stafford. When it comes to innovating inside large organisations, it can be a tiresome process. You tend to get bogged down in processes and politics, which means many great ideas can end up in the too-hard basket. The larger the organisation, the harder it gets. So there is a lot corporates can learn from startups when it comes to innovating. My guest in this episode, Vijay Solanki, has a unique perspective, as he has spent time working at Shazam and Last Minute in their early startup phases, but also worked with large corporates like Unilever, Philips, and BlackBerry, helping drive their innovation programs. So in this episode, we're going to explore why innovation in corporates is harder than it should be, what's different about startup culture, and what do corporates need to learn from startups. Welcome, Vijay. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Justin, thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to start by getting your perspective on why innovation in corporates is harder than it should be. Often ideas get bogged down in processes and politics. You've worked in large organisations like Unilever, Philips, and BlackBerry. What are some of the main things holding organisations back when it comes to innovation?
Bunch of important principles to enable innovation. One that I'd like to come back to later is what the hell does innovation mean? But the driving forces are around leadership, around culture, around capability, and really systematically how innovation gets done in a business.
Yep, there are four really big things, aren't they? Can you just expand on those a little for us? With your great experience.
Sure. So let's start with leadership. When the CEO, the C-suite sees the value of innovation, they're able to do a number of things well. One is get agreement and alignment from their peers. So even if it's the CEO who perhaps from a previous experience has come into a new organization and has realized that innovation is the growth engine for tomorrow. That's one simple definition. And even though they reconcile and acknowledge that the pressure is on to achieve those quarterly results, they are allowing space in their business for the business to think about tomorrow's revenue and how the business can evolve and grow and change for tomorrow in a way that is clearly separated from the day-to-day, quarterly, monthly, weekly shareholder value piece. So getting that set up and having leaders who understand that and can create that space, can do that with financial stakeholders. So if you've got investors, to explain we are investing this chunk of our time and resources and people on the day-to-day revenue, and here's, it could be a percentage of revenue, it might be a number of FTEs, it might be another metric that we're going to stay focused on tomorrow's revenue, on the innovation.
Yep.
If I move on to some of the other principles, culture. Look, I think cultures can vary by business vertical and category, and then cultures, each business has their own. So even if you take, say, financial services, a really well established and fairly progressive business vertical in Australia, the different banks and the different insurance companies will have different cultures when it comes to their attitude towards risk, their mindset when it comes to exploring new spaces. And my reflection is often the top and the bottom of big organizations are the most excited about innovation.
Yeah.
Strong leadership sees the value of it, and the new breed typically are the most excited about wanting to be part of new things. And then things can get stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
So one thing is, when you are evolving your culture, is to make sure that you've understood the cultural blockers across the entire organization, and don't expect innovation to happen just because leadership have said, look, this is what we're going to do and this is why we're going to do it. Make sure that you've looked through all of the enablers and the blockers across the middle of the organization, so you can see where things might get stuck. And capability is probably the third theme. Most people are hired into a business because they're good at effectiveness and efficiency of kind of getting the job done. Great marketing people, great salespeople, product people. They understand the natural cadence of a business. Innovation does not follow the same rhythm or the same cadence. And so, whilst it can be an expression that we can all use and kind of understand, in the same way that, for example, a great salesperson may be great at driving sales, but may not be a natural born sales leader. They'll need coaching and support. The same applies for innovation. So businesses, management across the entire organization need to be provided with training and support and mindset so they can see how innovation can work. There are all sorts of different models, from using funnels to taking a more agile approach, but not leaving it to granted that just because we've said innovation is going to happen, and just because we've carved out some money and some resources and some headcount, the training needs to be in place so people in those teams have got the capabilities, and with that, confidence. And the final pillar, if you like, is how you set up. So typically great innovation in medium to large organizations need to be people who are removed from the day-to-day.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a day job and you're trying to do innovation on top of, it will be hard.
Yeah.
Now, not depending on the size of the organization, there may be a limit, but I would push very hard in a medium-sized organization, or certainly a large one, to have dedicated people whose only job is to be thinking about what the business models and the products and the services 3 years, 2 years, 18 months from now. That should be their focus, and they should not be forced to do that on top of a day job where they're delivering, this week's revenue or this quarter's results. Not always possible, but that's the ideal.
Yeah. Yeah, that always ends up getting pushed into Horizon 3, doesn't it? It's on the strategy page and it just never gets done because you have to get pulled back into the short term, delivering the short term results. I think one of the other interesting things is, and what I've seen is, you see the innovation teams that have been set up, and I've worked in those over the years, and often they come up with ideas and concepts, which are great. They even pilot them, in market to test them, and then bringing them back into the larger organization. And sometimes the ideas almost get crunched down, the bureaucratic politics and all those sorts of things. So do you have any thoughts on how that works? Like, if you're talking about those innovation teams working separately and it's important to have separate teams, how do you sort of make sure it still works with the risk appetite and all those process things? Have you seen that work well in the past?
Yeah, let me share some real world examples. So my time at Unilever, there were separate innovation teams by business category. So, for example, I spent time working in the fabric conditioners category across Europe. We would run an innovation funnel system, like a gate system. So at any point in time, leadership who are sponsoring this innovation can see how many ideas we've got in a particular phase, how many concepts, and then how many early launches, and work KPI, the innovation team, to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of what I call innovation theatre.
Yeah.
Let's have a team that looks like they're doing cool stuff, and isn't it really amazing? Look at all these new AI tools, as opposed to true innovation, which is a commercial engine. So the innovation team are on the hook for demonstrating the commercial impact of what they do. There's a point in which, as part of that innovation journey, if you're in a kind of global, regional, local, multifunctional business like a Unilever, where leadership, you will have decided quite upfront, a pilot country, for example. And therefore, I remember once working closely with the Netherlands, who knew this new innovation in fabric conditioners was coming, and were able to line up resource in local R&D, in local marketing, and local sales. And we worked together as a regional, local project team. And therefore, the local sales team was still needing to go, in this case, it was the Netherlands, so go and meet with Dutch retailers, Albert Heijn, for example, and sell in the new concept. So it's teamwork, but it's teamwork that doesn't happen automatically. There needs to be some internal handshakes, and there needs to be some clear planning, so those teams on the ground have got enough runway to do the role that they've got to do to execute, to make sure we launch this new product properly.
Yeah, and that's so important, isn't it? Finding the teams once you've come up with the concepts in the innovation kind of area, finding the champions who and advocates who will carry the project on, because if it doesn't land in the right hands, it often sort of starts to stall a little bit. That's sort of what I found. So that partnership and almost selecting the right people is so important to keep it moving.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that typically in most organizations, certainly big ones, you have lots of people, and we all come in different shapes, sizes, and flavors. And that also means, when you look at things like attitude to risk, appetite for adventure, the notion of entrepreneurship, and you can figure out who they are across a business. So I think it's a really important point that you touch on. And you can do your own internal research to try and identify those people. So back in my Philips days, a global innovation role, we actually went out of our way. We almost worked like an internal consulting group, where we mapped out the early adopters within the organization, both at a senior level, but equally at a middle level and at a junior level. And we would be, as much as we could, reaching out to those people, because we knew they'd be the most excited. And emotions and usual human behavior matters. If you can tap into those, and sometimes you would do things like, and I think it's fair to do this, is to look at things like ego. I'd often look, when I look back, would be looking for the new leader, relatively new in role, with maybe a slightly higher appetite for risk, who's frankly looking to make a name for themselves. And often that's done with something new. So look, they would ask all the questions, and they would do their due diligence around the new product or the service. But once they were on board, they would knock down a few walls to make sure this thing got launched properly.
Now I'd like to chat about startup culture. You also worked at Shazam and lastminute.com in the early stages. So you're in a unique position, having worked in both, large corporates and startups. What's different about startup culture? We always hear about the, ping pong tables and all sorts of crazy things happening. You were on the inside. What's it really like?
Look, they can be quite different. The headlines, I think, are great startups are led by visionary, gritty, resilient founders. They're prepared to work harder, push further than most normal people. I have this view, which is great startup founders need to be slightly delusional. We can debate, how much. And what I mean by that is they need to be able to see the world in a way that most other people don't see the world just yet. Steve Jobs was a master of that. But if you think about the founders of Uber and Airbnb, those early stages, people are almost, you're almost expecting them to reject the idea. What you mean? I'd go and stay in someone's house? Oh, you mean I would go and get a ride to a destination in someone's car that isn't a taxi? Think back 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, Chris Barton, one of the founders of Shazam, was stubbornly delusional. And I mean that as a great
Yeah.
compliment.
Yeah.
So
I was lucky enough to actually
that.
hear him talk earlier in the year, and he talked about creative persistence, and you could see, yeah, he would have sounded like a crazy person when he first started, but yeah, he had that persistence to keep going.
Yeah, and I think great startups and startup culture is about building a movement as much as you're building a product or a service. And often that gets missed. But if I think back to both Chris and Diraj, Philippe, and Avery, the 4 co-founders of Shazam, were doing, with some actually quite cleverly calculated moves, were building a movement. So very carefully considered hires up front. I was lucky enough to be one of the early ones, but also some good thinking around the ecosystem. And even in the ecosystem, building friends, supporters within different parts. So, for example, we would, be building relationships with telcos. So Shazam mobile service, the telcos back then were utterly critical. And a bit like the earlier conversation, there were those that were leaning forwards going, this seems interesting. And then those that were leaning back going, this is nuts. Well, guess what? Let's get as close as possible to those managers, leaders in telcos, those early adopters, and really make it work. And we knew that if we could get one telco, then it would be easier to get the second. And once we got the second, the third. Equally, the same when it came to labels and music rights holders. Similar experience. There were many people in labels. I'd previously worked in a large commercial radio group and was very close to a bunch of labels who some literally disowned me because they thought we worked for a company that's slightly mad and we think you're infringing our copyright and all sorts of tension. And then you would go and search out those labels who could see a little bit of the future and wanted to be and got excited and wanted to be part of the movement. Same with media companies. So mapping the ecosystem, I think, is another really important thing, and finding the people that are the early adopters for your movement are key. As well as things like appetite for risk, the ability to. Great founders, I think, are really good with rejection.
Yeah.
And there's this notion that actually a quick no is helpful because founders have so little time. So a quick no means you can move on. Often in a corporate, you would go back and you would spend more time. So you're pretty key. You get quite disciplined around where to put your focus, because I think that's one of the hardest things to do as a founder and as somebody running a startup. So there are some of the themes. There are a few more I can add too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, risk is a big one. Being in a startup, there's less, you don't have the internal lawyers and risk departments and all that kind of stuff. So it's typically easy to come up with ideas and just start making stuff happen, but you don't have the budget or the scale to typically do it. So you have to almost go to the external partners to help sort of grow things. But yeah, interesting how you talk about, it's about finding the people who are going to help support you, get something up and running so as a proof point, like a working case study, a working pilot, and then you're going to actually get traction, and then slowly one by one get people on board. It seems like almost similar approach to in the corporate side, but that's obviously super important in startup world.
I think the big shift in great startup thinking is this notion. Actually, it's a phrase coined by a professor of entrepreneurship from Stanford Uni, a guy called Professor Steve Blank. And he coins this phrase, get out the building. And sure if I attribute it from him, but great founders fall in love with the problem and not the solution. And something I've seen in both corporate and startup, people with products looking for a problem to solve.
Yeah.
Whereas what you really should be doing is, before you've built anything, is get out the building and be talking to customers. And there's this notion that great founders and great corporate innovators are really good at insight. And insights are like diamonds. They're really hard to find, and they require digging and real effort. And this notion that you know your customer better than anyone else.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I think back to Unilever as a corporate example, I was lucky enough to work on the Dove team that were building the kind of precursor to the modern Dove brand, really championing the idea of beauty from within.
Yeah.
And that came from just going deeper with the research, asking more questions, and trying to and looking for little clues. I think great founders and great innovators look for these clues that might feel small now, but there's a belief that the wave would grow. And so, yeah, really searching hard, really making sure you speak to customers. And I think these days there's no excuse for not building really simple prototypes. So the old world, and part of the challenge still in many corporates is, well, innovation's expensive. It's going to cost us tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. Well, startups have shown us that you can do a lot with hundreds or thousands of dollars.
Yep.
And this notion, another quote from Steve Blank, which is, a startup is don't think of a startup as a company, but think of a startup as a series of experiments to demonstrate product market fit. And I love that notion, which is build hypotheses, set up experiments, have a view of what that experiment is going to do, and execute that experiment. And in most categories, there's a few exceptions, you can run those experiments with relatively low cost and relatively low risk before you then take a bigger stack of the company's money to go and build this thing for real.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. That experimental mindset, I think in corporates, it's, we're spending X amount of money, we want to see something happen. But, it's something that sometimes they lack. But obviously startups, it's really important to experiment. That's sort of where it all starts. And, like I say, it starts with the customer. You've got to start with really unique insights and, why are they doing that? Why would they buy this? Or, really digging into that. And the more you understand the customer, the better you can design products and services for them.
Yeah, and I'd throw in, forgive me for throwing kind of mantras or phrases.
No, go for it.
But this notion of, there's one of the traps of large corporations is analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
And there's this beautiful phrase in startup, which is sharpen the proposition on the stone of the marketplace. So the quicker, the earlier you can test stuff. I was brought up with traditional market research training, where you ask the customers what they thought. I think Steve Jobs and every startup, good startup, great startup, has kind of smashed that myth, which is, if you asked a customer whether they wanted a smartphone, in fact, Nokia did, and the customer said no.
Yeah.
So be wary of asking customers. Customers can't tell you what they want, but they can respond to stimulus.
Yeah.
And the issue with innovation in the past is that stimulus was often a product, and the barriers to entry for that product were often high and could cost tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. Well, now you can, you can build a wait list, as a measure of appetite for your idea. You can do that with literally hundreds of dollars. You can build prototypes in tools like Figma, and be using that. So this notion of don't ask customers what they want, but give them stimulus to respond to as a series of experiments. And then you've got lots of evidence to go back to your investors or your CEO or your C-suite to ask for a bigger chunk of money. And this notion that you do iterative steps, as opposed to the old world of being waterfall when it comes to innovation. That's how you de-risk it. And actually, that's why people think founders are crazy when it comes to risk. Great founders actually mitigate risk by breaking it down and showing investors all of these experiments.
Yeah.
So they then build confidence that actually now they've got a few $100,000 or even $1 million, that money is going to be well spent.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like there's a lot corporates can learn from startups in that space, experimenting and all those things you were talking about when it comes to innovation. Given you've worked in both environments, what are some of the key things corporates need to learn from startups to help them drive innovation better? What could they be doing, and what could they learn from startups?
So I think experimentation is key. So back to what we discussed right at the beginning, which is if you've got some large corporations, some folk that are dedicated to innovation, that they're doing two things. They themselves have got the training and the skill sets to run low cost experiments. It's getting easier and easier. And now, I mean, I'm sure we'll go on to talk more about it, but with the growth and the evolution of AI, it's getting even simpler to run experiments and to validate ideas. So the experimentation mindset, I think, is really key. Looking at there's a big growth of tools that you can use, things like creating value propositions and testing them, writing out business model canvases as a way of making sure you've thought high level through all of the components of the business idea, and so that it's very clear this isn't just a new solution or something that's gimmicky, but it's something that has huge commercial growth potential, and the business model canvas allows you to do that. And there's now a myriad of tools that allows you to interrogate customers. So building customer journey maps, doing pains gains analysis. There's another great pioneer. There's a bunch of great pioneers in startup, but Steve Blank's one of my favorites. But another, because I've made reference to his tools, is a Dutch guy called Frank Osterwalder. I think he has a website called Strategizer where you can access a lot of these tools for free.
Yeah,
and then
cool.
if you want support, and there are kind of paid versions. So there are tools that are out there. A lot of them cost nothing or very little that you should be using to set up hypotheses and experiments.
Yeah. And what's the best example of that experimentation, practice in a corporate world? Have you seen it done well in a corporate space?
Yeah, I go back to my time at Philips, and Philips operates in many verticals, but one is in male grooming.
Yeah.
So electric shavers and razors. And we were exploring some propositions, some concepts around personalized grooming. So we essentially ran some Google ads with some relevant keywords that brought them to a landing page where we offered a personalized grooming service. And there were different types. There were some which was, should we set up some barbershops? There were some that said, and actually this would be in this day and age, should we offer short consultations for free to offer some styling advice around different beard styles? What if we were to build an augmented reality app so you could try on virtual beard styles? And because all of those were significant investment plays, we built different landing pages to, one, see where the vote went. So bought keywords and pushed them to a landing page. We then followed up with some of those people and said, thank you. We're actually thinking of this business. For a small incentive, could we ask you some more questions? So it created a pre-selected, pre-committed research group. And some of those we kept with us as we started then building more prototypes. So you start small, you start cheap. And back to that early notion of building a movement, some of those early responders stayed with us and felt super motivated because they felt like they were building the product, because they kind of were.
And in the startup world, what's your favorite moment, I guess, where, let's say your back was up against the wall, things weren't going well, and did something or came up with an idea, what's your favorite moment where that happened? It's like you see in the movies where, they're struggling to get funding or what have you, or things are going, pear-shaped, and then something happens. It doesn't have to be that dramatic, but, what's your favorite startup moment, little spark that turned into something great?
Yeah, I think the reality is often these things are post-rationalized as beautiful, slick moments. Um, in actual reality, they're ups and downs and forwards and backwards. I think Shazam had a lot of moments. I mean, it was a quest, an eternal quest for the business model. So in the early days, we charged a fee to consumers to use Shazam, and because it was a magical service, it still is a magical service. Um, People would get very excited about using it, but we had a challenge, which was particularly when people were being charged. This was in the day pre-smartphones, in the day of dumb phones.
Yeah.
So you would get a text message with the name of the artist of the song, and it was through research, both formal research, but also lots of informal research in talking to the labels and the music media. It was a little bit of chance that we noticed that whilst most people would use Shazam a few times, and then because they were being charged 50p or 50 cents for each Shazam, would drop away, that would add up. And then we'd see this little slither of usage, which was heavy. And it was a combination of, by chance, in a research group, a DJ was in there.
Yeah.
And then we talked to a famous, I think it was British or American magazine called DJ Magazine, going, DJs need to know the music. And they don't care about spending 10, 20, 30 bucks a week. We're like, 10, 20, 30 bucks a week. Okay, how many of those? What's the market size?
Yeah.
And we just went out and did all the partnership deals we could do, and rev share deals and affiliate deals, because marketing budgets were tight, to find DJs. We got this spike of revenue. So I think those moments, that spike lasted, and then obviously you're under pressure to try and find the next spike. Those moments where you've hit upon an insight.
Yeah.
Whilst most people would get excited about Shazam, who really needs to know the music on a professional basis? Didn't dawn on us when we were starting off, but yeah, that came about through formal and informal research.
So you're doing some consulting with large organizations and helping them, I guess, learn the ways of startups. What sort of typical things are you doing in that space?
There's 2 or 3 key things that we're doing, Justin. One is making sure that corporates are meeting startups, and that's useful, but it has to be done really, really carefully, because the reality is they are 2 different species of human beings. So sometimes it's as simple as bringing some startups into the corporate, just a stimulus, just to get the founder, a successful founder, to unpack how they've gone about innovating.
Yeah.
And then I think we can use that as stimulus ourselves to further workshop and go, okay, well, that's how they've done that as a team of 10 or 20 or 50. You're a business of 1,000 people. What might that look like? And then it's back to those earlier conversations around who are the sponsors, who are the early adopters, who is that innovation team that we can then pull together, who are keen to learn from the world of startup and stay connected to that world. The second thing is really helping those that are responsible for innovation in larger companies stay abreast of the latest thinking, not just in startup methodology. And here I think it's one thing to be shown and taught the tools. It's another thing to be in a workshop for a couple of days where you build a landing page and you put it live and you drive some keyword and traffic to it, or that you build a clickable prototype and you commit that night to showing it to 20 people.
Yeah.
And you courageously get out there so that large corporations can see firsthand the practical applications rather than just be taught in a classroom-like way. And the third are kind of longer workshops where me and my team, my colleagues, are treated as part of your innovation team, and we'll bring outside thinking and some of that energy and some of that drive with all of our corporate experience, so we can help you navigate the idea through the business.
Well, unfortunately, it's time to wrap up. It's been so great to chat, BJ. You've given us a really great perspective on, corporate world versus startup world, and some really great stories from your time at Shazam. I really enjoyed those. So thanks for coming on and joining me.
My pleasure. They can learn a lot from each other. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Thanks for tuning in. Some amazing insights from a great business leader. If you found this insightful, make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button now, as we have some great episodes coming up. And if you have any questions or would like to chat, reach out to us at customersmarts.co. Catch you next time.